Rahu conjoining Mars. One is developing their strength of character, ability to train, have self-restraint, learn about energy and allocation of energy, learning about the fire element, raw animal instincts, logic, hunger and zest for life, and other martial themes. Rahu amplifies Mars and can give a very powerful outburst of energy which needs to be channelized. If not developed, one does not know how to make it all happen. The shoulds and should nots of life become a liability. So one can even have their own ideas about rightness and wrongness of things to hamper their willpower. So they might have a willpower, and then this voice of doubt can hijack it and make them quit things or like feel depressive again. Explosiveness, antagonism, taking on challenges greater than one can handle, overcoming illogical and unreasonable demands from oneself and others and life itself. Avoidance of inflammatory stimulants is very important. Cleansing from toxins and confusions caused by dissipating energy, creating procrastination, causing them to have a mental explosion. Protecting their energy body, not to channel other entities, and strengthening their aura, developing the required practice and getting the appropriate training in things, learning about anger, learning how to dissolve these anger rooted in wrongs, or developing anger sometimes. And happen them meditating upon a healthy anger to protect themselves from abuse, violence, and all kinds of other issues. Meditating upon love and forgiveness, overcoming righteousness, self-righteousness is what I mean, and aggressive speech, allowing oneself to respect life, overcoming compulsive decision making. And these are some of the development challenges of a Rahu Mars person. Sometimes they even need to develop a sense of right and wrong, righteousness. If one can work through this confusion, one becomes insightful and have a hands-on experience with a lot of difficulties of life and gives more practical advice to other people. One can take their martial practices to an extreme through focus and dedication. There's a capacity to work with teammates in a way that brings out the best in them while advancing oneself through their teammates. It becomes a mutually transformative experience. If imbalanced, one lacks willpower and focus to start and finish anything. It takes a lot of work and effort to work through this, and one must allow oneself to find the strength to be able to deal with these evolutionary goals. Mars must learn patience, training, and peacefulness to become mastered and override the confusion and chaos of Rahu. So it must know the capacity to fight and focus while keeping calm, right? Not lose oneself in the battle. Stoic philosophy can greatly benefit a Rahu Mars individual, though it will also require the support of Saturn, wisdom of Jupiter, etc. This is to bring to attention of the reader that all the grahas are involved at any given point in varying proportions, and the general astrological principle must be kept in mind while going through these interpretations. Rahu conjoining Mercury. Now, trial and error, experimentation, and a constant openness to experiencing and learning is the name of the game for Rahu and Mercury conjunction. This can often lead them to ingenious ways to look at things and very insightful meta-analysis of everything that they apply themselves, so they can work with complex philosophy and complex thought really well. They can also overdo it and make really simple things way too complicated. So there's always both sides of the coin. Discrimination, learning, intellect are the developmental challenges for the individual. It is difficult for them to learn, especially in Mercury's age, where the individual may show some unusual learning capacities which need to be noticed by the parents, or it may also show some learning disabilities which also need attention. However, over time, through making many mistakes, a Mercury and Rahu conjunction learns a lot about a lot of things. So they're hyper-curious individuals. They're the most hyper-curious. You'll see them knowing and learning a lot of things with a lot of curiosity. This placement requires a strong Saturn, otherwise the experiments can turn into traumas, and if the Saturn is weak, then a strong Venus, as it can help soothe the traumas of Saturn. And that's true generally for every placement. A healthy Saturn is essential for a good Rahu development. How far out we go with a Rahu development depends on how much a Saturn can persevere through all the challenges that all the other planets face. try to learn everything about something and something about everything. So that's a very Rahu Mercury sort of expression, quote. There is an experience where an error is made. The individual quickly begins to learn everything about that experience and how to not make such an error, and then experiments further, thus fine-tuning through observation. This happens compulsively and constantly. These eventually create a person who initially may be indecisive but develops a great capacity to experiment and learn, and this makes them lose their fear of failure and create a more ingenious and investigative personality. Their decisions are eventually based on complex data, difficult to understand for someone without the conjunction. They even may seem absurd to others, and they might even become absurd at some point. That is, they need to re-theorize, re-philosophize, re-look at all of what they are calculating and figuring out through all this data. Rahu's unusualness colors Mercury. One can arrive at strange conclusions and work with complex ideas. They can intuit an intellectual meta-analysis and have a knack to arrive at ingenious insights and conclusions. A very rapid approach to learning. They must learn to articulate and communicate their mind more precisely. The mind is going too fast, too many things, too many ideas. They must learn to slow down and communicate what is going on to actually create something of value, which they eventually do, as they made errors because of not being able to do so, and that made them get hyper focused on being able to do exactly that. So they make that error itself, and they even fix that within themselves because that is their attitude for everything else. This is a very interesting thing about this conjunction. It's one of the most desirable conjunctions with Rahu. The only desirable conjunction. Mercury is Vishnu and Rahu is Adishesha. It is the only desirable Rahu conjunction. However, it can also be painful in its own ways. The good part is especially that it learns and improves rapidly. Rahu is foreigners and Mercury is friends, so it can give international relations, foreigner friends, and foreign networks. One is attracted to foreign ideas, concepts, and have their curiosities constantly seeking for more. This level of curiosity may actually kill the cat. And thus, there is a need to ground oneself at some point and not go too far off into Rahu territories, otherwise intense destabilization of one's reality can occur. One can feel very anxious when articulating and communicating themselves, have criminal tendencies of a less violent nature. One may like to steal or break in. It can create, just for the game of it, just for the play of it, it can create devious lawyers who understand how to bypass the laws in ingenious ways. They must also learn how to hold healthy boundaries within friendships and other relationships. They can also give an information dump and confuse others. They must know when to stop and how much information is enough for the other person to get the point. Now, Rahu conjunction Jupiter, conjoining Jupiter. The developmental challenges is that of the matters of Jupiter, such as children, wealth, beliefs, discernment. All things Jupiter become convoluted in confusion due to either Rahu excesses, some sort of warped up beliefs, conspiracy theories, and other behaviors which are not very well accepted in society, which also may be rooted in the sense of seeking meaning and purpose in life in a sort of a, let's say, deranged fashion or in a unique way. Let's not have only a negative connotation. It can also create heretics and whistleblowers, anti-establishment people, but overall there's a little reason from happiness from such pursuits. They can be important for the evolution of collective consciousness, their difficult consciousness, their difficult life experience to embrace in general. For this this conjunction, the joy-giving wisdom quality of Jupiter, as told by Rishi Parashara, neither gives wisdom nor joy. But this is not true because one is developing into it. So eventually one heals, but initially the experience is such. And one must find oneself anchored in reality. The key is to develop discernment, overcoming fantasies, compulsions, obsessions, and over-optimism. The weak discernment can cause them to waste their time with people, places, and philosophies that lead them nowhere. One seeks to be good and do good, however, they do not have an intuitive understanding of what goodness is. So one can end up doing more harm than good, as it is often revealed to them eventually. It can also be difficult to find meaning and purpose. So they may seem pushy about their ideas that they compensate to find purpose, happiness, and meaning in some external form. They can also have very odd and confused philosophies. They need time to explore their interests and figure out their purpose. The lack of discernment, which creates alternative philosophies, can cause difficulties to women in their marriage and also towards raising children. And they may even raise their children in a very different manner if it's a more positive Jupiter. However, if Jupiter and Rahu are well supported and strong, then one can get into alternative marriage settings and ways to bring up children. Exactly. So the native is multicultural, world-centric, often very open to new experiences on the positive side. This causes them to observe life from a completely different vantage point and allows them to let go of all structures and often even create a postmodern relativist sort of belief system, who believes that the only absolute truth is that all truths are relative. And thus they can even get into philosophical bypassing by justifying their actions. So it's complex. Rahu, Jupiter are very complicated people, because Jupiter is how we understand life, how we make sense of life, what's our wisdom, and you'll see they're very open, and they're also very rapidly evolving into newer forms of wisdom, and they eventually gain a lot of meta-analysis of Jupiter, of different kinds of Jupiters. They'll access different Jupiters, different philosophies, what do you think, what do you believe, and they'll know a lot about Jupiter, but they will not have had, and that actually helps them evolve their Jupiter. They will not have had a truly they even may have had a bad experience with the Guru, with the Jupiter. That's also true with this position, because they overbelieved or surrendered to the wrong kind, and then they went to the other way. So now it says, one may have loose morals, the need to understand the metaphysical and moral framework surrounding the many ways of being. This depends on the rest of the chart also. All of this that I've been talking about. And then through trial and error, embrace the one which best suits their personality and creates the most amount of well-being possible. This is a challenging development goal, and the road that leads to realizing their obsession on finding meaning and purpose is laden with many obstacles created by lack of discernment. So the wisdom that guides one when one is in darkness itself needs to be developed. So they are in a school of hard knocks. While they are embarking on their Rahu journey, the wisdom is being developed as they're progressing, as they're making mistakes. They're not gracefully jumping out of it. And it's very hard to become conscious of the planets that are with Rahu. Often one goes through the experience and only in hindsight is able to see what Rahu was doing, how it was all playing out. Gradually, they may turn against the very philosophies and teacher they were so fanatical about. They may even feel betrayed in some way and develop further complexes. The pendulum then swings to the other way and goes on to preach against what they once preached for. There's often a need to find a philosophy that works, a formula they can follow, the inner wisdom mechanism that generates depth and meaning moment to moment and does not get confused by paradoxes, as all things Jupiter is lacking. This causes them to seek mercurial things more obsessively, ideas, concepts, analysis, etc., to compensate for the lack of this Jupiterian mechanism. They can seek to be very good people and who end up somehow being bad. That's also weird complexity. The key is to let, according to the people in their life, not that they're actually bad people, but according to the people in their life. The key is to let go of all ideas and simplify. Now Rahu conjoining Venus, a combination which causes the most dramatic shifts in reality and the most amount of transformation for the good or for the bad, depending upon the overall theme of the birth chart. I'm running out of time. The better the dignity, strength, and the overall well-being of displacement, the better. The otherwise very challenging and traumatic experience can arise, which take a lot of time to be processed and healed later on in life. Rahu's inexperience and compulsiveness begins to disturb Venus. Venus is a planet which makes life worth living in this physical body. It is desire nature which creates a fulfilling experience of life on earth, a healthy expression of love and devotion and sensory stimulation. Rahu with Venus creates very intense and crazy sexual fantasies, difficulties with finding fulfillment from sensual experiences. One can have phantasmagoric fascinations and enigmatic, hypnotic desires. One's ideas of love and devotion can involve excesses which lead to catastrophic results. They may find themselves either in sexually abusive relationship, is severely afflicted, or abusing others. One can become a playboy or a playgirl where they find themselves getting in and out of sexual relationships while feeling no sense of connection and fulfillment from any of them. One is seeking fulfillment from sensuality, relationships, and others while not recognizing and knowing what fulfillment is, without understanding what would actually fulfill them. This creates intense situations, transitions, and transformation of personalities and desires. One must learn devotion, sexuality, love, and fulfillment, and all the other ideas that involve the personal relationship. There's no perfect person out there that would fulfill the Rahu Venus's expectation. They must truly learn about the nature of desire. First, by making mistakes, often going through crisis, and then eventually realizing that all desire, no matter what, leads to more desire. Addictive tendencies, wanting to feel good constantly, wanting to be constantly in a state of sensual stimulus, through food, relationship, wine, women, sex, etc. This leads to emotional confusion due to energetic entanglements with many people. Learning about relationships and mutually beneficial partnerships, creating win-win situations, the idea of sacrificing one thing for another, a healthy exchange of value and energy, moral effort are some other key themes important for this conjunction. Rahu conjoining Saturn. All things Saturn must be developed. This is a particularly difficult placement. This is because, as discussed previously, Rahu requires a strong Saturn to embrace the difficulties of its karmic agendas and developmental goals. Saturn deals with restrictions, limitations, and perseverance, hard work, patience, slow, arduous tasks. And here, Rahu being with Saturn are the very things being developed, right? One must develop their capacity to bear burdens, difficulties, work hard, bear suffering and sorrow, be disciplined and routinized, the tedious work and the shit sandwich that every job requires us to eat. These are developmental goals that are not inherently present for every placement. To have these Rahu development challenges, the evolutionary goal in and of itself is cumbersome, and on top of that, having that which allows us to persevere, Saturn itself needing to be developed, adds an extra layer of complexity. One must remember, however, that through grace and grit, everything is possible. And that is not, and what is not, one can simply accept as the plan of the beloved Creator. Easier said than done, right? Yeah. So one can go to extreme of orders and chaos. They would impose limitation upon others as well as themselves. And this is essentially to find their capacity to grow in adversity, thus institutionalization and creating a difficult process or intensive structure within their life, which puts themselves and others through to create something of value. There's a sense of ruthlessness, coldness, aloofness within the makeup. It is not an evil instinct necessarily, but it can also be a compensation to safeguard their Saturn, which is underdeveloped and thus vulnerable to traumas. A truly detached person seems very attached, as we see in the spiritual matters who have overcome their Rahu, Ketu, and Saturn challenges. The aloofness, coldness, detachment, and the asceticism is a self-protective mechanism to safeguard their easily traumatizable Saturn. If carefully observed, there would be an early on instance in their life of the native where they are hurt in some way, and thus it was only obvious for them to create a personality that deals with life in a more detached fashion. This is the typical fear-laden complex of Saturn, which requires healing within each one of us. However, for Rahu and Saturn, the lesson is to learn healthy detachment and a healthy way to persevere in the many obstacles of life. If they don't do this, their life falls apart, and if they do, there's pain to deal with. Avoidance of pain only creates more pain. Thus, having a more transcendental practice helps, where one can tune out of the many burdens and pains of life. This can be greatly helpful. One must develop to set up one's life in such a way that there's order and discipline, and there's cycle of order strengthens them, and then they can create a better life. Since Rahu is illusory and creates detachments, derangements, there may be imagined restrictions and limitations. which the person may be dealing with, which creates a fearful personality. This is especially true when Saturn-Rahu conjunction is a bad planetary dignity. Saturn-Rahu internalizes the suffering and pain aspect of life more than others, and this can also be very beneficial for a Stoic or Buddhist, where essential philosophical presupposition is that life is suffering. Light enters the heart through suffering. Suffering of Saturn wakes up the intoxicated and sleeping heart, who is singing praises and tunes of the world, but it is the music of the spheres far above this region that one tries to hear when the heart is filled with unbearable burdens and fears. This is a call for spiritual awakening. One can often become hyper-fixated on traditions and go to the other extreme of becoming anti-tradition. One must find balance as always with every Rahu and Ketu position. Rahu-Saturn can also give work with foreign cultures and foreign things, and work in remote places where they explore ingenious ways to do things and recreate long-standing structures. Finally, as Dr. Nun Amin-Ra says, self-imposed discipline is the surest way to improve the quality of one's life. Period. So I had to go a bit fast. All these insights are due to my teachers Ryan Kozak and Ernst Willem, and all the errors are my own. Thank you so much for tuning in to such and such an astrology and going through this presentation. I hope this was of value. I will see you soon, hopefully for a video on Ketu conjunct all the grahas. Thank you so much. Dhanyavad.